The Florida sun blazed mercilessly overhead, its golden rays dancing across the restless Atlantic waves as they rolled toward the crowded Miami Beach shoreline. It was one of those sweltering summer afternoons when the beach became a refuge for thousands seeking escape from the inland heat. Families spread colorful blankets across the warm sand, children shrieked with delight as they chased retreating waves, and teenagers tossed frisbees with carefree abandon. Among the sea of sunbathers and swimmers, a woman in an elegant black one-piece stood at the water's edge, her designer sunglasses reflecting the brilliant horizon. Victoria Matthews had spent the last 72 hours locked in boardrooms, navigating hostile takeovers and multi-million-dollar acquisitions that would reshape entire industries. Her temples throbbed with the familiar ache of sleepless nights and endless coffee, while her shoulders carried the weight of decisions that affected thousands of employees across her real estate empire. She waded into the cool embrace of the Atlantic, feeling the salt water wash away the stiffness in her joints and the fog in her mind. Each stroke carried her further from shore, further from the suffocating world of corporate warfare that had consumed her life. The rhythmic motion of swimming had always been her meditation, her escape from the relentless demands of building and maintaining a billion-dollar fortune. But today, her body betrayed her. The first sign of trouble came as a flutter in her chest, an irregular stutter in her heartbeat that made her pause mid-stroke. Her vision blurred slightly as she treaded water, trying to orient herself. The shore seemed impossibly distant now, a hazy line of golden sand that wavered like a mirage. Panic crept up her throat as her arms grew heavy, her legs struggling to keep her afloat. Her heart hammered erratically against her ribs, each beat sending shockwaves of dizziness through her skull. She tried to call for help, but only a strangled gasp escaped her lips before the world tilted sideways. The last thing Victoria Matthews remembered was the taste of salt water flooding her mouth, and the strange sensation of weightlessness as consciousness slipped away. The waves carried her limp form toward shore with indifferent persistence, rolling her body through the shallows as beachgoers began to notice the unnatural stillness of the figure in the surf. Shouts erupted across the sand as people pointed and gestured, their voices rising in alarm. A lifeguard's whistle pierced the air, but the nearest tower was several hundred yards away, too far to reach her in time. That's when Michael Rodriguez looked up from the sandcastle he was building with his 9-year-old daughter Sophia. The former paramedic's trained eyes immediately assessed the situation, and his body moved before his mind could process the decision. He sprinted toward the water, his flip-flops flying off as he pounded across the hot sand, reaching the unconscious woman just as another wave threatened to drag her back into deeper water. Michael dropped to his knees beside Victoria's still form, his calloused hands moving with practiced efficiency as he checked for pulse and breathing. Her lips had taken on a blue tinge, and water trickled from the corner of her mouth. Without hesitation, he tilted her head back, cleared her airway, and began the life-saving rhythm he knew by heart. 30 chest compressions, firm and steady, then 2 rescue breaths. The crowd pressed closer, forming a nervous circle around the unfolding drama, their beach day transformed into something far more serious. Sophia watched from a distance, her small hands clutched together as she whispered prayers. She had seen her father work medical emergencies before, during his years as a first responder, but it never got easier to watch him fight for someone's life. Michael's world narrowed to the essential rhythm of CPR, his muscles burning as he maintained the precise compressions that could restart a heart. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the sand as he counted silently, willing this stranger to breathe again. He had learned long ago not to think about the person beneath his hands as anything more than a collection of vital signs that needed to be restored. The paramedics arrived as Victoria's body suddenly convulsed, salt water erupting from her lungs in a violent cough that brought the most beautiful sound Michael had ever heard, the ragged gasp of someone returning to life. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, as she struggled to understand where she was and why her chest felt like it had been trampled by horses. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Michael barely heard them as he helped turn Victoria onto her side. The EMTs took over with professional efficiency, strapping Victoria to a gurney and hooking her up to monitors that beeped reassuringly in the warm afternoon air. Michael stepped back into the crowd, brushing sand from his knees as he watched the ambulance pull away, its red and blue lights cutting through the golden haze of the Florida Sunday. He had done what needed to be done, nothing more, nothing less. Sophia ran to her father and wrapped her arms around his waist, her voice muffled against his wet shirt. "Is she going to be okay, Daddy?" Michael ruffled her sandy hair and nodded, though he knew from experience that survival was only the first battle. As the crowd began to disperse and normal beach activities resumed, Michael collected their belongings and headed home with Sophia, having no idea that the woman he'd just saved controlled a real estate empire worth more than $15 billion. The story broke on the evening news just as Michael was putting Sophia to bed, the lead anchor's voice carrying the gravity of near tragedy. Billionaire real estate mogul, Victoria Matthews, was rushed to Jackson Memorial Hospital this afternoon after nearly drowning at Miami Beach. The 43-year-old CEO of Matthews Holdings was reportedly saved by an unknown Good Samaritan who performed CPR until paramedics arrived. The report continued with file footage of Victoria at various charity galas and business conferences. Her polished image a stark contrast to the vulnerable woman Michael had pulled from the waves. Stock prices for Matthews Holdings had already begun to fluctuate on the news, as investors worried about the stability of the company without its visionary leader. The anchor concluded with an appeal for information about the mysterious rescuer. Michael clicked off the television and shook his head in amazement. He had saved a billionaire without knowing it, though the knowledge didn't change how he felt about his actions. Rich or poor, famous or anonymous, everyone deserved the chance to see another sunrise. He tucked Sophia into her bed, listening to her prayers and her excited chatter about how her daddy was going to be on television. In her private room at Jackson Memorial, Victoria drifted in and out of medicated sleep, her dreams filled with fragments of memory from the beach. She could recall the feeling of drowning, the panic as her body failed her, but the face of her rescuer remained frustratingly blurred. The doctors had explained that short-term memory loss was common after near-drowning experiences, but Victoria's business mind was already working on the problem. The morning brought a parade of visitors to Victoria's hospital room. Her assistant arrived with tablets and phones, keeping her connected to the empire that never slept. Her brother flew in from New York, his face drawn with worry and relief. Board members called with updates and concerns, their voices carefully neutral, as they navigated the delicate question of succession planning. Through it all, Victoria found herself distracted by the memory of strong hands on her chest, the feeling of someone fighting for her life when she couldn't fight for herself. The media circus outside the hospital grew throughout the day, with reporters and camera crews hoping for a statement from the elusive billionaire. Security guards maintained a perimeter, but the questions shouted through the glass still reached Victoria's ears. Everyone wanted to know about the mysterious hero who had vanished into the crowd after saving one of America's most powerful women. Michael returned to his job at the community center the next morning, teaching swimming lessons to underprivileged kids and helping maintain the aging facility that served as a lifeline for his neighborhood. The work paid barely enough to cover rent and groceries, but it filled his heart in ways his old career never had. These children didn't care about his past as a decorated paramedic or his struggles as a single father. Sophia spent her summer days at the center's daycare program, her presence a bright spot in Michael's otherwise routine existence. She had inherited her mother's quick wit and her father's compassionate heart, though she was too young to understand how rare that combination truly was. The other kids gravitated toward her natural leadership, and Michael often found himself watching her organize games and settle disputes with wisdom beyond her years. The news coverage of Victoria's accident played on the center's ancient television during lunch breaks, but Michael paid little attention to the speculation and analysis. He had more pressing concerns, like the center's funding crisis and Sophia's upcoming school year. The reward money being offered for information about Victoria's rescuer could have solved both problems. But Michael had no intention of coming forward. Victoria's frustration grew with each passing day as private investigators failed to identify her mysterious savior. Security cameras from the beach had been damaged by salt spray and provided only grainy, useless footage. Witness accounts varied wildly, with some describing her rescuer as tall and others claiming he was average height. The only consistent detail was that he had been accompanied by a young girl. 3 weeks after the accident, Victoria made the decision to visit Miami Beach herself, hoping that returning to the scene might trigger clearer memories. Against her security team's protests, she walked the same stretch of sand where she had nearly died, studying the faces of swimmers and sunbathers with the intensity of a detective. The beach held no answers, only the endless rhythm of waves that cared nothing for human dramas or billion-dollar empires. As she stood at the water's edge, Victoria noticed a small girl building an elaborate sand fortress nearby. The child worked with fierce concentration, her tongue poking out slightly as she carved delicate details into the walls. Something about her dedication reminded Victoria of herself at that age, before money and power had complicated every interaction. On impulse, she approached the girl and complimented her architectural skills. Sophia looked up with bright eyes and thanked the strange lady politely, the way her father had taught her to speak to adults. She explained that she was practicing for a sand sculpture contest at the community center, where her daddy worked teaching swimming. The conversation was innocent enough, but something about the girl's earnestness struck a chord in Victoria's heart. When Michael appeared a few minutes later, calling Sophia's name and jogging across the sand toward them, Victoria's world tilted on its axis. Even without the life-or-death urgency of their first encounter, she recognized him instantly. The strong hands that had brought her back from the brink, the focused expression she had glimpsed through the haze of near death. This was her mystery hero, playing the role of devoted father on a sunny afternoon. The recognition was immediate and overwhelming, hitting Victoria like a physical blow to her chest. Michael's eyes widened as he took in her appearance, the expensive clothes and subtle jewelry that marked her as someone from a very different world than his own. For a moment, they stood frozen in mutual recognition, while Sophia continued her sandcastle construction, oblivious to the significance of the moment unfolding around her. Victoria found her voice before Michael found his, extending a hand in formal introduction while her heart hammered against her ribs. "I believe we've met before," she said, her voice carrying only the slightest tremor. Though the circumstances were rather different. Michael accepted her handshake, his calloused palm engulfing her manicured fingers as he confirmed what they both already knew. Sophia looked up from her sandcastle with curiosity, sensing the change in atmosphere even if she didn't understand its source. Her father's posture had shifted into something more formal, more guarded, while the pretty lady seemed to be holding her breath. The little girl had learned to read adult moods the way other children read picture books. The conversation that followed was carefully polite, both adults navigating the awkward territory of their vastly different circumstances. Victoria expressed her gratitude with the kind of eloquent phrases that came naturally after years of public speaking, while Michael deflected her thanks with the modest shrugs of someone unaccustomed to being treated like a hero. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Victoria made a decision that would have shocked her business associates. She asked Michael and Sophia if they would join her for dinner. Nothing fancy, just a chance to properly thank the man who had given her a second chance at life. The invitation hung in the air between them like a bridge across their different worlds. Michael's instinct was to decline politely and return to the safety of his routine existence. He had learned from painful experience that mixing with wealthy people often led to complications and disappointments. But Sophia's excited gasp and hopeful expression made the decision for him. His daughter had grown up with so few luxuries, and if this woman wanted to buy them a nice meal as a thank you gesture, perhaps he should swallow his pride. The restaurant Victoria chose was elegant but not ostentatious, the kind of place where the food was exceptional but the atmosphere remained welcoming to families. Sophia's eyes went wide as they were seated at a table with actual cloth napkins and more forks than she knew what to do with. Victoria watched the girl's wonder with something approaching enchantment, remembering distantly what it felt like to experience luxury as a gift rather than an expectation. Victoria found herself ordering dishes specifically to see Sophia's reaction: lobster bisque that made the child's eyes roll back in pleasure, chocolate soufflé that prompted an actual squeal of delight. Michael observed this interaction with growing unease and growing warmth in equal measure. Victoria was clearly enchanted by Sophia's unguarded enthusiasm, but there was nothing patronizing or artificial about her attention. The conversation between the adults remained carefully neutral throughout the meal, touching on safe topics like the weather and the quality of the food. But underneath the polite small talk, both were conducting a more complex evaluation of each other. He was surprised by her lack of pretension, the way she spoke to Sophia as an equal rather than talking down to her. She was intrigued by his complete lack of interest in her wealth or status. As the evening wound down, Victoria made another impulsive decision. She asked if she could see Michael and Sophia again, perhaps take them to a baseball game or a museum, some activity that Sophia might enjoy. The request was phrased as a continuation of her gratitude, but there was something in her voice that suggested deeper motivations. Michael hesitated, his protective instincts warring with his desire to give Sophia experiences he couldn't afford on his own. The little girl looked between the adults with the shrewd intelligence of a child who understood that her father was being offered something important. Her small hand found his under the table, a gesture of support and encouragement. In the end, it was Sophia who made the choice for all of them. With the fearless honesty of childhood, she told Victoria that she had seemed very sad when they first met her on the beach, and that she hoped the pretty lady would come play with them again soon because everyone needed friends to help them not be sad. The simple wisdom of the statement hung in the air like a benediction. Victoria's composure cracked slightly at Sophia's words, a single tear sliding down her cheek before she could stop it. In boardrooms and conference calls, she was known for her emotional control, her ability to make ruthless decisions without flinching. But this 9-year-old girl had seen through all her defenses to the loneliness that money couldn't cure. The weeks that followed established a pattern that surprised everyone involved, including Victoria herself. She began visiting Michael and Sophia at their modest apartment, trading her designer suits for jeans and sneakers as she joined them for simple activities that had been absent from her life for decades. She learned to make grilled cheese sandwiches that were only slightly burned, helped Sophia with homework that challenged her in ways boardroom presentations never had. Michael watched these interactions with a mixture of amazement and growing concern. Victoria seemed to genuinely enjoy the mundane aspects of their daily routine, finding wonder in grocery shopping and laundry folding that suggested just how isolated her regular life had become. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was a temporary fascination for her. Sophia had no such reservations. She accepted Victoria's presence in their lives, with the easy adaptability of childhood, treating her like a favorite aunt who happened to live in a mansion and drive cars that cost more than most people's houses. The little girl took particular delight in teaching Victoria things. How to braid friendship bracelets. The rules of hopscotch. The proper technique for making the perfect paper airplane. Victoria found herself lingering after Sophia's bedtime, sitting at Michael's kitchen table over cups of coffee that cost less than the wine she usually drank but somehow tasted better. Their conversations during these quiet hours revealed the people they were beneath their public roles. She talked about the loneliness of command, the weight of decisions that affected thousands of employees. He shared his fears about raising a daughter alone. These late-night talks became the foundation of something neither had expected. A genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared values rather than social convenience or professional networking. Victoria discovered that Michael had given up a promising career in emergency medicine to focus on being a full-time father after his wife's death from cancer. Michael learned that Victoria's ruthless business reputation masked a woman who remembered every employee's name and sent flowers when their children were born. She had built her empire not just to accumulate wealth, but to create jobs and opportunities for others. Her legendary work ethic stemmed from a fear of letting people down. As their friendship deepened, the outside world began to take notice. Paparazzi photos appeared showing Victoria in casual clothes, laughing with a man and child, who were clearly not from her usual social circle. The business press speculated about her mysterious new friends while gossip magazines invented elaborate stories about secret romances and hidden agendas. The first real crisis came when a particularly aggressive photographer followed them to Sophia's school, hoping to get pictures of the billionaire in her unlikely domestic role. Sophia was frightened by the shouting man with the camera, and Michael's protective instincts exploded into a confrontation that ended with security guards and threatened lawsuits. Victoria's family and business associates had remained diplomatically silent about her new companions, but the school incident prompted a series of concerned phone calls and carefully worded interventions. Her brother flew in from New York for what he called a family meeting, bringing along the head of Matthews Holdings' public relations department and a lawyer who specialized in protecting high-profile clients. The meeting took place in Victoria's Coral Gables mansion, a testament to wealth and success that felt oddly cold and impersonal after weeks of spending time in Michael's cluttered but warm apartment. The assembled team of advisors presented their case with professional efficiency. Victoria's association with Michael and Sophia was creating unnecessary complications for the company, potential security risks for herself, and unwanted scrutiny for an innocent child. The solution they proposed was elegant and complete. A generous financial settlement for Michael's family, a carefully crafted public statement about their friendship, and a gradual, dignified separation that would allow all parties to return to their appropriate social spheres. Victoria listened to their presentation with the same attention she brought to merger proposals, but her heart was pulling in a completely different direction. The pressure from her inner circle was matched by hostility from Michael's community, where rumors and resentment had begun to fester. His neighbors whispered about gold digging and social climbing, unable to believe that a single father would befriend a billionaire without ulterior motives. His colleagues at the community center asked pointed questions about his sudden access to expensive restaurants and exclusive events. Michael felt the weight of judgment from both sides, caught between worlds that seemed determined to prove they couldn't coexist. He had never asked for money or favors from Victoria, had insisted on paying his own way whenever possible, but the perception of impropriety followed him wherever he went. The stress began affecting his work and his relationship with Sophia. The breaking point came during a charity gala that Victoria had insisted Michael and Sophia attend as her guests. The event was meant to be a celebration of a new children's hospital wing that Matthews Holdings was funding, but the media focused entirely on Victoria's mysterious companions. Photographers pushed and shoved to get pictures of the billionaire's secret family. Sophia was overwhelmed by the chaos, clinging to her father as camera flashes exploded around them like fireworks. Michael's attempts to shield her from the attention only made the photographers more aggressive, convinced they were witnessing a major story unfold. Victoria tried to deflect attention, but her usual media skills seemed inadequate against the feeding frenzy. The final straw came when a particularly obnoxious reporter cornered Michael in the men's room, offering him $50,000 for an exclusive interview about his relationship with Victoria Matthews. The implication was clear. The media saw him as nothing more than a fortune hunter. The encounter left Michael feeling dirty and angry. That night, After putting Sophia to bed, and listening to her excited chatter about the beautiful dresses and fancy food, Michael made the most difficult decision of his adult life. He called Victoria, and told her that their friendship had to end, that the attention and scrutiny were damaging Sophia's childhood, and threatening his reputation. His voice was steady as he explained his reasoning, but his heart was breaking with every word. Victoria's response was immediate and heartfelt. She offered to hire security, to find ways to protect their privacy, to use her influence to stop the media harassment. But Michael had made up his mind. Sophia's well-being came before everything else, including his own happiness and Victoria's feelings. He thanked her for the kindness she had shown them both, and then gently but firmly ended the call. The weeks that followed were among the darkest in Victoria's adult life. She threw herself into work with renewed intensity, pursuing deals and acquisitions with a ruthlessness that worried even her most ambitious colleagues. She traveled constantly, attending meetings and conferences that kept her mind occupied but did nothing to fill the Sophia-shaped hole in her heart. Michael's pain was different but equally profound. He went through the motions of their daily routine, teaching swimming lessons, and helping with homework, but the joy had gone out of activities that Sophia had previously loved. The little girl asked about Miss Victoria constantly, wondering why she had stopped visiting, and whether she had done something wrong. Sophia's confusion turned to determination as weeks passed without any word from Victoria. With the stubborn persistence that she had inherited from both parents, she began planning ways to reunite her father and her friend. Her 9-year-old logic couldn't comprehend why three people who obviously cared about each other would choose to be apart. The opportunity for Sophia's intervention came during a routine visit to the pediatrician for her annual checkup. The appointment went smoothly until Sophia mentioned feeling tired and having headaches during their walk to the car. Michael initially attributed the symptoms to stress, but something in his daughter's pale complexion triggered his medical training. He insisted on additional tests, blood work that revealed an anomaly serious enough to warrant immediate consultation with a specialist. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors, medical consultations, and increasingly dire possibilities. Sophia's condition was rare but treatable, requiring specialized surgery that was available at only a handful of medical centers nationwide. The procedure itself was complex and expensive, well beyond the reach of Michael's community center salary and basic health insurance. As he sat in the pediatric oncology waiting room, researching treatment options on his phone, Michael felt the weight of his limitations crushing down on him like a physical force. The irony was not lost on him that he was facing the same impossible choice that drove many parents into bankruptcy: watching his child suffer due to lack of resources, or accepting help that came with strings he couldn't afford to pull. Victoria learned about Sophia's condition through a chain of connections that money and influence made possible. A mention of the case during a hospital board meeting. A familiar name that triggered recognition. A discreet inquiry that confirmed her worst fears. The little girl who had taught her to make friendship bracelets was facing a medical crisis that her father couldn't afford to address. The decision to intervene was immediate and non-negotiable, but the execution required delicacy that Victoria's usual corporate approach couldn't provide. She couldn't simply write a check without Michael's permission. Couldn't use her connections to arrange treatment without his knowledge. What she could do was work behind the scenes, using her influence to ensure that Sophia received the best possible care. The first indication Michael had that someone was pulling strings came when the hospital's financial counselor called to inform him that an anonymous donor had covered Sophia's entire treatment cost. The woman's carefully neutral tone couldn't disguise the magnitude of the gift: hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills simply erased by someone who wanted nothing in return except Sophia's recovery. His confrontation with Victoria took place in the hospital cafeteria at 2 in the morning, both of them exhausted from worry and running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline. Michael's anger at her interference warred with his relief that Sophia would receive proper treatment, creating an emotional storm that he struggled to articulate. Victoria's defense was simple and unassailable. She loved Sophia like family, and family didn't let each other suffer when help was available. The argument that followed was hushed but intense, attracting curious glances from medical staff, who recognized the tension even if they couldn't hear the words. Michael accused Victoria of using money to solve problems that required emotional solutions, of thinking she could buy her way back into their lives, after he had specifically asked for distance. Victoria countered that his pride was less important than Sophia's life. Their heated exchange was interrupted by a small voice from the cafeteria entrance, where Sophia stood in her hospital gown and slippers, having escaped from her room to find her father. The sight of her two favorite adults arguing brought tears to her eyes, and her trembling question cut through their anger like a blade. "Are you fighting because of me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The immediate silence that followed Sophia's question was broken only by the soft hum of vending machines and the distant sound of elevator bells. Both adults moved toward the child simultaneously, their argument forgotten in the face of her obvious distress. Victoria knelt beside Sophia's wheelchair while Michael wrapped his arms around both of them, creating a protective circle that shut out the rest of the world. Sophia's recovery became a team effort that none of them had planned but all of them needed. Victoria used her connections to ensure the best surgeons and most advanced treatments, while Michael provided the emotional support and daily care that no amount of money could purchase. They took shifts at Sophia's bedside, reading her favorite books, and playing games that didn't require her to move around too much. The surgery was successful, but Sophia's recovery required weeks of careful monitoring and physical therapy. During those long days in the hospital, Michael and Victoria found themselves talking honestly for the first time since their forced separation. The crisis had stripped away their defenses and social pretensions, leaving only two people who cared deeply about the same little girl. Victoria's confession came during one of Sophia's afternoon naps, when exhaustion and worry had worn down her usual emotional barriers. She told Michael that their friendship had changed her in ways she was still discovering, that Sophia had taught her what family felt like, and that walking away from them had been the hardest thing she had ever done. Her voice cracked, as she admitted that all her wealth and success felt meaningless without people to share it with. Michael's response was quieter but equally heartfelt. He explained that his resistance to her help wasn't about pride or prejudice, but about fear. Fear that Sophia would be hurt when Victoria inevitably grew tired of playing house with regular people. Fear that he would become dependent on a lifestyle he could never maintain on his own. But watching Victoria fight for Sophia's health had shown him that her commitment went far deeper than charitable impulse. The conversation that followed laid the foundation for something new between them, a relationship built on mutual vulnerability rather than social convenience. They talked about the practical challenges they would face, the media attention, the family pressure, the simple logistics of building a life together across economic lines that American society rarely crossed. But they also talked about shared values, compatible dreams, and a love for Sophia that transcended all other considerations. Sophia's first question when she woke up from her nap was whether the grown-ups had finished being silly and decided to be happy again. Her matter-of-fact tone suggested that she had never doubted the outcome. That adult problems were just temporary obstacles that love and common sense would eventually overcome. The wisdom in her 9-year-old assessment humbled both adults. The decision to go public with their relationship was Victoria's, made with characteristic directness during a press conference that was supposed to address Matthews Holdings' quarterly earnings. After delivering the required financial updates, she surprised the assembled reporters by announcing that she was in love with a man named Michael Rodriguez, a single father and former paramedic who had saved her life in more ways than one. She spoke about Sophia with obvious affection, describing the little girl who had taught her that family wasn't about blood or social status but about showing up for each other when it mattered most. The media reaction was immediate and intense, but Victoria faced it with calm determination that impressed even her harshest critics. She answered questions about Michael's background and their relationship with the same directness she brought to business inquiries. When one particularly aggressive reporter suggested that Michael was using her for financial gain, Victoria's response was swift and cutting. "If you knew anything about Michael Rodriguez, you would know that he has turned down every penny I've offered him except what was necessary for Sophia's medical care. He doesn't want my money. He wants my heart, and he's welcome to it." Michael watched the press conference from Sophia's hospital room, his emotions cycling between admiration for Victoria's courage and anxiety about the increased scrutiny her announcement would bring to their lives. But Sophia's excited cheering at seeing Miss Victoria on television reminded him that their relationship had always been about more than just the two adults involved. The public response to Victoria's announcement was mixed but generally more positive than any of them had expected. Her honesty about the relationship seemed to neutralize many of the gold digger rumors, while her obvious happiness created a human interest story that even cynical reporters found compelling. Editorial writers debated the broader implications of cross-class romance in America, but most focused on the fairy tale aspects rather than social significance. Michael's reintegration into Victoria's public life required adjustments from all parties involved. He learned to navigate charity galas and business dinners with the same calm competence he brought to medical emergencies, while Victoria discovered that her favorite social events were the ones that included Sophia's delighted commentary and Michael's dry observations about the wealthy people around them. The wedding, when it finally happened 6 months later, was a study in elegant simplicity that reflected both Victoria's resources and the family's values. The ceremony took place on the same beach where Michael had saved Victoria's life, with Sophia serving as maid of honor and the Atlantic Ocean providing a backdrop that needed no decoration. The guest list included everyone from Fortune 500 CEOs to Michael's former colleagues at the community center. Sophia's speech at the reception brought tears to eyes that rarely showed emotion in public, as she thanked everyone for helping her daddy and Miss Victoria figure out what she had known all along, that they belonged together. Her 9-year-old wisdom about love being simple while adults made it complicated became the toast that guests remembered long after the champagne was finished. The honeymoon was spent not in an exotic resort but in a rented beach house, where Sophia could play in the sand while her parents walked the shoreline hand in hand, marveling at the chain of events that had brought them together. Victoria often paused at the spot where she had nearly drowned, amazed that what had seemed like a tragedy had actually been the beginning of the greatest adventure of her life. Their new life together required constant negotiation and compromise, as they learned to blend Victoria's high-pressure business world with Michael's community-focused values and Sophia's need for stability and normalcy. They established rules about media access and family time, created traditions that honored both their backgrounds, and discovered that love really could bridge the gap between penthouse suites and community centers. Michael eventually returned to emergency medicine, but as the director of a trauma center that Matthews Holdings funded, allowing him to use his skills on a larger scale, while maintaining his commitment to serving everyone regardless of their ability to pay. Victoria scaled back her direct involvement in day-to-day business operations, focusing on strategic planning and philanthropic initiatives. Sophia thrived in their blended world, equally comfortable at board meetings, and swimming lessons, charity galas, and community barbecues. She became the bridge between her parents' different backgrounds, translating corporate speak for her father, and explaining the importance of neighborhood friendships to her mother. Her presence reminded both adults that the best parts of their relationship had nothing to do with money or social status. Years later, when reporters asked Victoria about the key to their unlikely success, she always gave the same answer. They had learned that love wasn't about finding someone from your own world, but about creating a new world together. Michael's response was typically more practical. They had simply decided that their relationship was more important than other people's opinions about it. The beach where their story began remained a special place for their family, a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life came disguised as ordinary days. Sophia, now a confident teenager with her father's compassion and her mother's determination, often brought friends there to hear the story of how her parents met. She never tired of telling them that love could happen anywhere, to anyone, as long as they were brave enough to recognize it when it arrived.